Uhuru, thank you for joining us. Uhuru, my name is Coco Lewis. I'm the International Secretary of the African National Women's Organization, ANWO. I'm your MC for tonight's political education. African Women Must Lead with Yejide Orunmila is a series of live monthly political education programs from the African National Women's Organization, led by President Yejide Orunmila. Tonight's topic is Women in Revolution, examining the importance of women to struggle for national liberation, where President Yejide will look at anti-colonial struggles from Africa and in the world. References for this PE are African Women in Revolution by W.O. Maloba, Revolution in Guinea, selected text from Emil Carr Cabral, Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle by Thomas Sankara, The Las Sanadistas, the film, Fighting Two Colonialisms, Women in Guinea-Bissau by Stephanie Ordain, and various articles and reports of African internationalist struggles around the world. There will be an opportunity to raise issues pertaining to today's PE during the Q&A period, but please comment and engage throughout the program. African Women Must Lead is a multi-streamed live on the Burning Spear and ANWO channels on YouTube and ANWO's Facebook page. Please take some time to like, share, and follow us on these platforms. ANWO is also on Instagram and Twitter for the folks who want to keep up with what we're doing between broadcasts. If you would like to know the exact dates of our future streams, make sure to follow us and check out our website for details. Uhuru, welcome, President Yejide.
Uhuru, Comrade, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you just once again for leading as the MC of these programs. I just want to send a shout out to everybody who's sharing their Uhurus in the chat. Hey. We got a comment out the gate before we even started the program. So we can just expect this to be a really great, I can expect this to be a really great presentation, but also an opportunity for us to engage with comments and people who have, contributions to this discussion, because surely I don't know all of the things and nuances related to African women in revolutionary struggle, or even colonized women in revolutionary struggle, but I'm going to attempt to bring it forward, just examples from the African world. So thank you so much, Comrade Coco.
Uhuru.
So again, this is, I want to, the first comment was just, was from someone who agreed that African women should lead. And I just really want to take some time to explore that subject, or that, we are not saying that African women should lead in spite of men. We are saying that African women must lead in every single, despite as a part of the natural progression of human society, and that colonialism has retarded our efforts to participate in society as equal partners and movers and shapers of human history. And so what we're saying with the title African Women Must Lead is that, we have to reject any notion that African women are supposed to be support or follow up or, be behind the scenes, and that African women must step into our greatness, not just as people who are critiquing, even though we can do that, but also accept the responsibility for shaping the world in a way that will lead to real social transformation. So that's what we mean by African women must lead. It's not a knock on men or their inability or ability to lead. It's a encouragement for African women from all over the world to step into the forefront, things that we may have been doing in the back end or in support, we can actually lead on and be confident in our ability to lead on those questions. So thank you. So I appreciate that comment. I just wanted to offer some clarification. So tonight, I am going to be referencing a bunch of material. I'll be reading from a couple of things, but primarily, I thought it was really interesting For me to learn about African women and our participation in national liberation struggles, there have been number of references and books that have talked about women's lib, women's struggles to be equal to men, and so on and so forth, that I'm sure that people may have um, experience with. But I really wanted to dig into like why African women in particular, but also colonized women, participate in national liberation struggles. What were some of the gains? What were some of the failures in those societies? What contributed to those gains and failures? And what sorts of things in society caused women, force women really to compel them to join struggles for national liberation? So I wanted to start off today with a section from the Fifth Congress, the political report to the Fifth Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, that basically set up, which is a resolution to say that the African National Women's Organization must be created. And the chairman wrote this and offered this as the basis for why we need an African National Women's Organization. He wrote, "We want an end to the political and social oppression and economic exploitation of African women. We believe in the absolute, unequivocal political, social, and economic equality of African women and men. We believe that a fundamental test of the progressive or revolutionary character of any organization, party, movement, or society is its commitment, confirmed in practice, to the destruction of the special oppression of women and the elevation of women to the rightful place as equal partners and leaders in the forward motion of the development of human society and as leaders, makers, and shapers of human history. Our commitment on this question of women's role in society has always been reflected in the leadership of our party, where women have historically been well represented and sometimes in the majority. However, we never structured our party or our work in a manner to guarantee that concerns and issues critical to the progress and protection of women were always considered and advanced as a natural aspect of our work. But African women, who bear the brunt of the attacks of our whole people, are catching hell. It is they who suffer the vicious humiliation and degradation associated with the definition of all women who experience bourgeois rule. But African women also suffer the consequence of being an oppressed nation that is defined as bestial and inhuman by the ruling class or the oppression nation. Additionally, as women of the oppressed nation from which value is extracted at the expense of the ability of the oppressed nation to produce and reproduce life, African women and girls in most places find themselves reduced to beasts of burden, fighting for the survival of themselves, their children, and families. I thought it was important to pull this out because the chairman is right. Like throughout the party and from the history, but also present day, like the ranks are filled with African women. African women are responsible for many areas of the party's work. And so when the proposal for a specifically women's organization to deal with African women's issues came about, it was just like, okay, why do we need to do that? Because often, I'll speak for myself, that as an African woman who felt a part of the African nation, I didn't necessarily like peel out my specific oppressions as an African woman. I wanted to I just wanted to bang down the whole thing, and whatever I was experiencing, whether I acknowledged it or not, or whether other African women were experiencing or not, that wasn't really the fundamental question. But I really appreciated this section that the chairman said, that even though the rank and file members of the African People's Socialist Party have always been in the women have always been the majority of these of this party, that it was necessary to build an organization that was going to speak to the interests of women. And that to me is one of the critical, fundamental bases for this political education today. Because when women participate in national liberation struggles for whatever reason, sometimes it's not really expected or named that what's happening to us is a part of that struggle to destroy that thing that colonialism has imposed on us. So, we might just be joining because as part of the oppressed, colonized masses, we want shit to change. We want things to be, we want to overturn the relationship of power that keeps our people poor, impoverished, underdeveloped, and all these things. But there are a lot of nuances to that, because there are specific things that happen to African women and colonized women within the colony that also has to be overturned, because colonialism deposits all these things on us. So I'll be looking at, I'm going to show the books on camera. Like, so I've been reading these books over and over and over for years. So some of you may have heard me talk about them many times, but African Women in Revolution by W.O. Maloba. I specifically love this book by Thomas Sankara, but it's not a book. This is a speech that he gave at an International Women's Day in 1985. And really, one of the foremost leaders on African women and transforming the status of African women on the African continent was Thomas Sankara. So you need to look him up. And then Fighting Two Colonialisms by Stephanie Erdang, who's a white woman who went to Guinea-Bissau to record like what's happening there on the ground, but also the impacts of women during that time of armed revolutionary struggle. And then, of course, The Revolution in Guinea by Amilcar Cabral, because this has been one of my inspirations. Like, he has been one of my inspirations for such a long time. So I have several books regarding Guinea-Bissau, but I'm going to be expanding that too. Also look at the history of African women in this country. We're going to talk through some of the Caribbean, South America, or Spanish-speaking places in South America and Central America, and then also anywhere else in the African world, right? So when we talk about national liberation struggles, I'm talking about actual struggles to overturn a relationship of power that exists, that have African people in particular colonized and oppressed. And so we're taking from history. We're looking at historical documents that we see African people fighting for national liberation, which means that, there's colonial domination direct from places like Britain, from France, from Portuguese, especially, and Spain and other places that have dominated and used these places as colonial plantations. So people are upset. They recognize the relationship of power, that they themselves are not getting what they needed, that the oppressor, the colonizer, has taken everything that they had, their labor, their bodies, their everything, and it's serving the oppressor. So when you have this direct colonialism, this is something that you always feel. And then they know that also within that society is the development of classes, particularly within the colony. So you have these petty bourgeoisie who facilitate the laws and policies for the colonizer, and they themselves basically uphold the status quo. So there's a lot of struggles that happen to decolonize oneself. So when we talk about national liberation struggles, we're talking about an entire people or a vanguard people who are taking it on to destroy those relationships of power that have the direct foreign colonizer over the direct foreign colonizer over Africa, over the colonized. And we'll soon learn after most of these national liberation struggles that it was replaced with neocolonialism that we're experiencing right now. And, but for the most part, we're talking about just the overturning of that. So when I want to sip my nose. So African women who are involved in the struggle to free our people from colonial bondage may not always recognize the societal barriers that we face are a part of that struggle too. Like I was saying earlier, like childcare, I don't know of any woman who says, I want to join the national liberation struggle so I can have childcare. We usually just join the national liberation struggle because we recognize that this is some foreign dominating force that is impacting my life. But then the struggle for childcare happens as a part of the revolutionary process to allow more women, right, who are mothers to participate in the revolutionary struggle. So we don't enter it to that, but during a revolutionary process, there has to be ways to like equalize society to allow the half of the nation, the half of the population to participate, because the idea that men are the ones who make the revolution and women are somewhere in the back is false. Like if you're trying to win something, you need the entire population. You need to be represented by the entire population. In most places in the world, African women either are equal or majority to African men. So you have to figure out how you get this sector of the population to be involved in this national liberation struggle, because if you don't, then you're not going to win, period. And we see that many successes of national liberation struggles are met because African women have been politicized, mobilized, and there were efforts to include them in some way in the transformation of society. And so when, for example, when we look at some of the failures, which we'll do a little bit later, that you can see that some of because we don't center ourselves, because there wasn't organizations or institutions as a part of the revolutionary struggle to make sure that what African women or colonized women needed were set in stone in policy to carry us through an armed revolutionary struggle, that sometimes when we didn't have those institutions, that the gains or successes that made society equal during this process would fade away. And so, right now, African people are not engaged in armed revolutionary anti-colonial struggle anywhere on the face of the planet. That's why, like, when we talk about the African National Women's Organization, that as an organization that is a way to organize ourselves, to really think about what does it mean to gain national liberation, what does it mean to bring the struggles of African women and make those things the basis for which we are engaging in this revolutionary struggle. We want to transform that thing, and also make sure that not just that it's like an issue of African women, but that it's an issue of the whole people, the whole entire people. Whatever is bothering us, whatever is an issue or a barrier for us, is an issue and a barrier for African people. Not just as us as women, but these are the things that if we can solve, can forward the progression of society, that we can make solutions for and try to deepen our understanding of, can forward the progress of African people and toward a future where we don't have to deal with oppression within our ranks, but also the oppression of the colonizer itself, because we would have done away with that. So I wrote here, recognizing that African parents, especially mothers, I wanted to raise this too, that when we look at women also within the sector of the colonized African nation, that African mothers are like, they feel it a lot more, because now you're taking care of yourself and now you have these children that you also have to take care of, and you're forced into a colonial workforce to survive, take care of yourself, support your family if you're by yourself. And even if you're not by yourself, you're still forced into the colonial workforce. So the ways in which colonialism impacts you is a lot deeper than, say, a single person, even though that single person also experienced that oppression. So even when we look at the question of women, colonized women, we also see these nuances that happen. I wanted to read something from Sankara on page 40. If any of you have this book, I know I didn't share any of this information beforehand, but in Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle on page 40, Sankara talks about the jobs and how colonialism compacts some of the issues that we face. So he says, only half as likely as men to attend school, women are 99% illiterate. Have little, he's talking about this condition in Burkina Faso, have little training in trades, are discriminated against in employment, are confined to the worst jobs, and are the first to be harassed and fired. Yet burdened as they are by hundreds of traditions and 1,000 excuses, women have continued to rise to meet challenge after challenge. They have had to keep going whatever the cost, for the sake of their children, their family, and for society in general. There are 1,000 nights without a dawn. I think that's really important, because when we talk about the special oppression of African women, that's part of what we're saying, is that you experience this colonial domination from your oppressor who's over you. And then because of what they put on into society, you're now experiencing the demands of meeting the colonial expectations. You are also trapped in these traditions where the expectation is that you still have to take care of home and family and all these other sorts of things. And then you're also just expected to be, to fit this colonial expectation of what a woman is, right? And so when we look at society today, we also see that nothing really has changed in that view. Like, we're talking about a colonial society that oppresses African people, and we are part of African people. And then we experience like all these demands on us through the colonial mode of production. It says you have to work, you have to pay all these bills, and if you have children, it's even worse because you have all these other sorts of financial constraints that really have you bogged down in the struggle just to survive. And how do we change those things? And so we look at that in the context of national liberation struggles, to say like why people got involved. So, for example, some people got involved because it ended up working toward like dealing with these, especially in rural and peasant communities, uh, marriage, forced marriage, things that are related to children. They wanted to increase their health and work education. They wanted to be a part of politics and military. They want to be protected from violence. They wanted to organize themselves to get better wages, particularly in the United States, and the sort of subjugation and oppression that comes along with being domestic workers. And this is stuff that has happened over like 40, 50 years, and we're still experiencing many of this today. So how did we get here? So as African internationalism tells us that um, African people were minding our own business on our African continent, doing our thing, trying to establish society as best we know it. And through the attack on Africa from Europe, who was on a mission to get resources and things to fulfill the needs of Europe and white people in Europe. This attack robbed Africa of our human resources, of our natural resources, and took us to and kidnapped us, stole us away, and brought us to many different places around the world. And as a part of that, Europe also deposits, they colonized Africa. So they went into these different places, they exploited traditional roles, they exploited ethnic differences, they created a society in which they deepened the society in which women were less valued than men, and that the expectation is that women would continue to be trapped in these roles that eventually, in modern society today, are not even needed for are not necessary. In the U.S. and in other places where African people were enslaved, African people were just trapped in this feudal slavery that had all African people subjugated, but also still reinforced these gender roles and expectations of men and having power over women, even though men didn't have power over themselves. So when we look at how things have developed in those two veins, we can see like how this power structure emerged. Now we have African people in both spheres, like the colonizer enslaved Africa and the enslaved population in the Americas, fighting for their own liberation. And you see the participation of African people, not just women or men, but African people who are engaged in the struggle to liberate themselves from that. And we see, though, what some of the issues are with that is that the same sort of deposits of colonialism that lands that has been a part of our lives for hundreds of years have been left because we didn't deal with those issues. We just kind of mimic those things. And so when we talk about like the national liberation struggle, African women in particular found it very difficult on the continent to shift out of that. There actually had to be a lot of political education campaigns. For example, in Guinea-Bissau, the Amilcar Cabral's party had to go into the rural areas. Actually, that's where they built the most significant opposition to Portuguese rule, was in the rural areas. And they had to do a lot of like shifting. They didn't go in and say, you can't treat women like this. They actually had to negotiate with the community and say, listen, you are, don't you think that it would be important that if somebody gets hurt in war that this woman needs to be trained, or this woman and or man needs to be trained in how to give care. So you should let them come with us to be trained in how to be a medical doctor. And they was like, yeah, that makes sense. But they also had to negotiate with the community and say, well, you're losing a worker, right? This is women who have primarily the responsibility of doing everything, raising the children, getting the food, cooking the food, and, you know, never having to sit down the entire day. And now men had to now say, okay, if she's going to be gone, who's going to do these things that she was doing before? So as opposed to being like an oppressive factor, a domineering factor, it was a negotiation with community to find alternatives to the traditional lifestyle. And I think about that a lot because there are things that I don't necessarily like about the ways in which men and women interact with one another. But if you want to win the population, if you want to win a majority of the people to go along with the revolution, you have to find a way to allow them to make the decision that they want to change. And the way that the revolution is going, they can see the progress. And that's why they would want to change. They want to be a part of that progress to overturn, like to destroy the colonial oppressor. But in order to do that, they have to see that the change that they're engaging in, that they're agreeing to, is going to lead toward that overturning of the oppressor. And in Guinea-Bissau, we saw that. We saw African women becoming a part of the military. And they didn't have these combat boots and stuff. They had their little wraps on with guns on their back, babies in arms, protecting their villages, doing what is it called? Vigilante farming and creating schools. Young girls were now pushed toward going to schools, and boys and girls had to go to school together, whereas before they could not do that. More and more women were being trained on how to type and how to do some of the administrative functions in addition to men, and that there were actual councils within the village that were formed to allow African women to have leadership in those villages, whereas before it was probably some male decision making factor, and women decided on what to grow, what to do with the children, but men made some of the leading decisions in that village. So here we see a shared sort of power that was motivated by the shift in the entire social mode of production that was happening at the time, where we're saying we're going to get rid of Portuguese rule over us. And do we want to mimic what the Portuguese have done to us, or do we want to allow for the fullest participation of society to be a part of this transformative process of freedom? So what does freedom really mean to you? Looking at also like Guinea-Bissau, the way they did that, the way they would explain is that, you know, they have a soldier that would come in and he would take up residence in the forest. And somebody would go into the forest to collect wood or do some other kind of thing. And he would, the soldier would say, give him political education in the forest, and he would go back and tell somebody else that they just got into the forest and they saw a soldier and they got political education. So eventually half the village would go into the forest to get political education, and they would be politicized every single day. And that's how they were able to be successful in transforming the peasantry, the people who are in the countryside. Because if you think about society, the people who are most oppressed are the people who don't have the water, who don't have the access, who are not in close proximity to white power. So there's people in the country who are not getting all these benefits. And so those are people that you really want on your side, because these are people who most desperately want society to change. Somebody who's in close proximity to white power, close proximity to colonial power is like, oh, I already got the benefits of this thing. Like, I got running water, I wear nice clothes, I drive a car. So, you know, I don't need to change anything really. But the person who don't have any of that, who wants that for themselves, but also for the broader society, is more motivated to change. So for the most part, the revolution in Guinea-Bissau actually started in the cities, and by educated, the petty bourgeoisie, most of whom committed class suicide and engaged in definite struggle. But they also thought about, like, what do we want society to be, and also recognize that they can't make a revolution without African women, and African women have to be a part of the transition of society. So I think that's really important, that they didn't that they made sure. And I think it's really important too to show that mostly all of the anti-colonial struggles for national liberation always made a commitment to include women in the struggle. I mean, you couldn't bypass it though, because women were just like there. You needed forces, you need labor, and sometimes women were more willing to engage in armed struggle than some men. So like you can't pass that up. But there's also that opportunist piece there that accepts the labor of women, colonized women, accepts that they would lead struggles, even win and lead battalions and all of these things for the national liberation struggle, but there's no recognition or there's no transformative piece that addresses their specific issues. And after they lead this battalion, that they got like 3 kids that they need, if they have 3 kids that they have to take care of, or there's some other sort of recognition of that. I was watching this film, Las Sandinistas, and I would recommend that you all go watch it. And it was talking about the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, and it was specifically about the women who engaged in that struggle. And I found the film to be really interesting because we're talking again about the peasantry, the poor working class, the people who don't have anything, standing up to the government and why they engage. And we saw that sometimes the women were not like armed combatants. They were people who were hiding stuff in the homes. They were hiding people. They were actually accumulating resources. And then that sometimes they actually graduated to armed combatants, particularly when they saw other women engage in that. So they now feel confident that they're able to do that. But one of the things that the film really highlights, which basically generated the post-colonial like feminist movement in the country, was the fact that even though these women were like kicking ass of the ruling class, leading armed revolutionary struggle, leading men and women alike, winning, putting their life on the line, and they still weren't able to deal with the machismo and some of the even throughout the armed struggle. You can carry a gun, but then they were subjected to you know degradation, misogyny, all of these things that were. And even the film recognized that we didn't struggle with that. We were comrades, and we wanted to keep with comrades, but we didn't really engage in any struggle because we thought that struggling within the context of the national liberation struggle was counterproductive. But we saw at the end of that film that it wasn't. There was no arm. There's no women's arm of that movement, and because there was no women's arm of that movement, it is none of the things that they were confronted with before national liberation struggle, before the armed struggle, and within the armed struggle were ever accomplished. After the armed struggle, then there was a time where they were trying to develop these departments and organizations to deal with the issues of women. But at that point, the Sandinistas were in government, and the same sort of machismo that they experienced as a part of the armed struggle was still there, and nothing had been done to overturn that. And now you have power, and the same people who were, saying weird stuff, exacting misogyny and all these things were in power. And so they didn't feel the need to really recognize the issues of women in that vein. So, so we looking at like that as a failure, right? Like, so that's why, like, when I started out the piece with the chairman talking about like women can participate in all these things, but if you don't have an avenue for women to forward their revolutionary aims and objectives, or even for a place, even if they don't know what their aims and objectives are, but you don't have a department to kind of say, what are our aims and objectives, then you're not gonna accomplish these things. Thomas Sankara did an amazing job. He was noted as one of the first people in the world to take on and equality for African women in the world, equality for women in the world. And what he did after the Upper Volta became Burkina Faso, the land of upright men. That's what Burkina Faso means. That he took on single-handedly with transforming that society. He recognized that there were women who were illiterate, if there were women who did not have access to jobs, there were women who were chastised in society for being unwed mothers and therefore blocked from getting an education, while the boys were able to do whatever they wanted to. There were forced marriages and genital mutilation and all these things that were latent upon women. When you think about that, right? Like, you have men going about their life, right, dealing with the colonial oppressor. Then you have women who dealing with the colonial oppressor, and they got to deal with forced marriages. They got to deal with uh, uh, the weight of tradition to have them get married, and you have all of these other nuanced things that men didn't have to deal with but were beneficiary of. And here we have an African man in Africa who's like, F that, like, this is not the way that I want this society to be, and I want to do everything that's possible to transform that. And here, I think I had a page. So 55, page 55 to 58 in his book, he talks about male chauvinism. And please give me some grace. I'm about to read these, and I'm hopefully going to be able to get through it. But he says, comrade militants of UFB, he's creating a union. It's a union that's being created for African women workers. Your union, our union, should participate fully in the class struggle on the side of the popular masses, those millions whose consciousness was dormant and who have now been awakened by the coming of the revolution represent a formidable force. On August 4th, 1983, we, Burkina, made a decision to rely on our own resources, which means in large part on the resources that you women represent. To be useful, your energies have to be focused on the struggle to eliminate every breed of exploiter and imperialism's economic domination. As a structure for mobilization, the UFB will have to forge a highly developed political awareness among its militants so they can completely revolutionary commitment as they carry out the different actions initiated by the government. Comrades of the UFB, only the revolutionary transformation of our society can create conditions favorable for your liberation. You are dominated both by imperialism and by men. In every male sleeps the soul of a feudal lord, a male chauvinist, which must be destroyed. This is why you must eagerly embrace the most advanced revolutionary slogans to make your liberation real and to advance toward it more rapidly. This is why the National Council of the Revolution notes with joy how intensely you are participating in the big national development projects and encourages you to give ever greater support to the August Revolution, which is above all yours. By participating massively in these projects, you are showing yourself to be all the more worthy, given that in its division of labor, society has always sought to relegate you to the least important task. Your apparent physical weakness is nothing more than the result of norms of appearance and fashion that society has imposed on you because you are women. As we go forward, our society should break from all those feudal concepts that lead to ostracizing the unmarried woman without realizing that this is merely another form of appropriation, which decrees each woman to be the property of man. This is why young mothers are looked down upon as if they are the only ones responsible for their situation, whereas there's always a guilty man involved. This is how childless women are oppressed due to antiquated beliefs when there is scientific explanation for their infertility, which science can overcome. In addition, society has imposed on women norms of beauty that violate the integrity of their bodies, such as female circumcision, scarring, the filing of teeth, and the piercing of lips and noses. Practicing these norms of beauty is a dubious value. In the case of female circumcision, it can even endanger a woman's ability to have children and her love life. I thought that was really important for him to say, and her love life, because oftentimes when you think about these things that attack a woman's reproductive organs or reproductive parts of their body, is you basically relegate women to just being child bearers. But he actually put, like, it impacts her love life, just the quality of of the sex that they have with a person and their ability to enjoy that. I thought that was like amazing, right? And then other types of bodily mutilation, though less dangerous, such as piercings of ears and tattoos, are no less an expression of women's conditioning imposed by society if a woman wants to find a husband. Comrade militants, you look after yourself in order to win a husband. You pierce your ears and do violence to your body in order to be acceptable to men. You hurt yourselves so that men can hurt you even more. Ugh. Women, my comrades in arms, it's you to whom I am speaking. You who lead miserable lives in town and village alike. You in the countryside who sag under the weight of the various burdens of dreadful exploitation that is justified and explained. You in the towns who are supposedly happy, yet deep down are miserable day in and day out, laden with tasks because as soon as you rise from bed, you turn around in front of your wardrobe like a spinning top, wondering what to wear. No, not so as to be dressed and to protect yourself from the elements, but to please men. Every day you are supposed to be compelled to please men. I think that's really important. Like in a society, like I'm not a Burkinabe, and I don't know what it feels like specifically to construct your world as an African woman to be focused on being married and to have children as a testimony of your womanhood. I mean, that's just super oppressive. I mean, you could see forms of that now and still probably exist in many places around the world. But like to for him to dedicate so much time to that piece in particular is really important because African women and women overall today do a lot of things to appeal to the opposite sex. And also, if you're not a childbearing woman, like what does that mean in terms of your value in society? And there are many things that are happening around the world that will offset, that sort of label that can come on people. And lots of things that women are doing too. And but I just thought it was really important for him to also say that that men who are experiencing male chauvinism take on the feudal lord inside the home. There was one thing that Maloba said in his book, where he talks about the center of women's oppression is in the household. He says this is located, the micro analysis of male oppression of women, this is located in the household. Instead, the site of oppression was shifted from the household to colonial public policies and the impersonal forces of capitalism, both of which are alone responsible for leaving women powerless and victims. So there was, what did he say something else? He said this, which basically like highlights like, these things that the reason why colonized women engage in struggle or is one to get out of the household oppression, the responsibilities that have them trapped within the home and doing all the things that women are expected to do within the home. They want to get out of that and go out to the revolution, the broader revolution. Like I want to learn how to do this skill or this thing so that I can be a part of the national liberation struggle to overturn our relationship to the colonizer. And what happens though then is that the things that are happening in the household sometimes never really get focused on, and we never really see that. We see that the revolution is a way of liberating us from those tasks, those things, those traditional roles, as opposed to having to use those traditional roles, right, and our resistance of them to add to the revolution, like Sankara did. Yeah, I was trying to find another place that I was referring to, but that was in Maloba's book. And it's really important for us to understand too, like how this all developed, even in the U.S. I talk a lot about Africa, but there is a piece that I've, is like one of my second things that I study a lot, which is a piece by Claudia Jones, who is an African woman who was born in Trinidad, but did a lot of her organizing in the U.S. and England. And a lot of you may already know who she is. And she was a staunch member of the Communist Party. And in June 1949, she wrote a piece called "An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman." And in it, she lists out like how it is that enslaved African women and enslaved African men emerged in society, taking on these colonial uh, roles within the household and in society. Like, how do African men then say, I'm the king of my household, as opposed to saying that we are in this together, right? Or vice versa, but mostly king of my household sort of thing. She writes, actually, the history of the Negro woman shows that the Negro mother under slavery held a key position and played a dominant role in her own family grouping. This was due to primarily two factors: the conditions of slavery, under which marriage as such was non existent, and the Negro's social status were derived from the mother and not the father. Right? And the fact that most of the Negro people brought to the shores by the slave traders came from West Africa, where the position of women, based on active participation in property control, was relatively higher in the family than that of the European woman. I really appreciate, like we see throughout all these pieces, right? African internationalism, some of the like even how Europe underdeveloped Africa, like the mode of production, how African women were experiencing life in most of Africa, and what was taken away from us. Like when we think about like progress in today's society, we think that, oh yeah, we're fighting for women's rights because we have a right to our body and we have a right to these things, and there's this law and this policy and all of these things that would validate, this sort of trend toward progress, when we don't really fully understand what was taken away from us as women, like and how colonialism and enslavement really took away from us. Of We were advanced, we were ahead in terms of equality between women and men. We were far ahead, even though there were traditional roles and there were things that were happening in society that may have been more abusive to women. It was still, in terms of a people, more advanced in Europe in terms of relationships between like women and men. And colonialism, what it did was impose the patriarchy of Europe that had been existing since, Europe existed, the property, the commodification of women and children, and the exalting of men. They basically imposed these in these colonies. So even exploiting those traditional roles that may have been set up in society because of what was needed, they were now exploiting that through their own understanding of the world, which was far beyond what was happening in Africa and other places around the world where indigenous people were having life. And so, this point was really important. Like, I like this point. And it says, early historians of the slave trade recall the testimony of travelers indicating that the love of the African mother for her child was unsurpassed in any part of the world. There are numerous stories attesting to the self-sacrificial way in which East African mothers offered themselves to the slave traders in order to save their sons, and Hottentot women refused food during famines until after the children were fed. It is impossible within the confines of this article to relate the terrible sufferings and degradation undergone by Negro mothers and Negro women generally under slavery. Subject to legalized rape by the slave owners, confined to slave pens, forced to march for 8 to 14 hours with loads on their backs, and to perform backbreaking work even during pregnancy, Negro women bore a burning hatred for slavery and undertook a large share of the responsibility for defending and nurturing the Negro family. The Negro mother was mistress in the slave cabin, and despite the interference of master or overseer, her wishes in regard to mating in the family matters were paramount. During and after slavery, Negro women had to support themselves and the children, necessarily playing an important role in the economic and social life of her people. The Negro woman became schooled in self-reliance, in courageous and selfless action. So here we have, after the Civil War, the slave routes were broken up and the tenant houses scattered all over the plantation in order that each family might carry on an independent existence. The new economic arrangement, the change in the mode of production, placed the Negro man in a position of authority in relation to his family. Purchase of homesteads also helped strengthen the authority of the male. Thus, a former slave who began life as a freedman on a one-horse farm with his wife working as a laundress, but who later rented land and hired men, recalls the pride which he felt because of his newfound status. Quote, in my humble palace on the hill in the woods beneath the shade of towering pines and sturdy oaks, I felt as a king whose supreme commands were law and gospel to my subjects. One must see that a double motive was operative here. In regards to his wife and children, the Negro man was now enabled to assume economic and other authority over the family, but he could not fight against the violation. But he could also fight against the violation of women of his group, where formerly he was powerless to interfere. So we're seeing like this split in society. Like the split was already happening. Like, we were colonized, we were enslaved for hundreds of years, and development of laws and policies that gave more power to men in that society, particularly African men, were benefiting from that. And also the fact that you have been robbed of being able to do any of this. So after slavery, you have access to purchase land, and because of your status as a male or your identity as a male, you were able to access more things than African women, and that puts you in a different position. And of course, you're mimicking, the colonizer who's also had dominion over you. And um, yeah, so this is really important to note, like this development. And I'm glad I'm really like tied to this. So this mode of production that she also said, a change in the mode of production, from one that was enslaved Africans based to one that now still was enslaved African, like free African based, but the society wasn't arranged in that way anymore, where that was acceptable. So you had, African people having more access to certain things. And so like people often use Claudia Jones also as like the preeminent intersectional feminist, but she never identified as a feminist, and feminism didn't even wasn't in existence at that point. She was a communist. She was an anti-imperialist. She wanted to introduce the fact that African women, as being part of the oppressed African nation and experiencing some of the double oppression, as she calls it, had the most to gain from committing and volunteering and giving their lives to the transformation of society that would bring down imperialism. And I agree. Still to this day, when we look at what's happening in the Sudan right now, where African women and children are on the run, and men too are on the run, but also they're on the run from internal conflict, but also are experiencing violence from African men. In addition to like this colonial violence that they experience, right? They're also experiencing violence from African men who are doing the bidding of the colonizer. And so we have these scores of African women and children and men who are on the run, fighting for their lives, and having to, really just keep everything together. So like these are much of what we are experiencing as African women, is that we are also, just by tradition, the caregivers and nurturers of family and keeping together of communities. And y'all know grandmama them and auntie and all of those people that we often think of very fondly are the cultivators of our society and holds people together. That once you destroy that fabric, though, once you destroy the very fabric in which they're holding together, then the colonizer has won. So that's why it's super important for the issues that address, that may not impact African men particularly, but can doubly oppress African women, has to be brought forward into the narrative of revolution. It's not enough to say we're going to have this African Women's Organization over there. It's like, how are you pushing forward the entrance of African women into the international discussion around revolution and anti-imperialism? Not Black people, not African American issues, but African women. We have to be able to see the scope and breadth of the issues, like the scope and breadth of what's happening in the world and how that impacts our ability in the US, in Caribbean, or anywhere else to forward. So I'm bringing up Sudan again because this is a 6 month war. But we know Sudan is always, experiencing some sort of conflict every so and so years, but this is this one of the places that really destabilizes the African world, and it's a counterinsurgency. And so when you think about the reasons why somebody in the Sudan would want to be a part of anti-imperialist or in national liberation struggles or anti-imperialist struggles, then they have every motivating factor. They want to keep their family together. They want to stop the violence that targets women. They want to make sure that they're safe. These are all the reasons why women engage. Like, we don't want to live in fear and violence anymore. And sometimes that means that we have to create a situation where we are engaging in violence to free ourselves from violence, and figuring out different ways within that armed struggle to ensure that we can salvage the community, and all of that. So I'm seeing some of your chat questions for a minute. I think I shut up in about 3 minutes, um, but yeah, a lot of what I say sometimes also sounds repetitive because I feel like I have to continue to make a point, and my point being that the reason why we are engaged in this struggle to educate the community, but also particularly African women around our struggle to be free, is to not see ourselves and our issues as something that is specific to our gender, but that our issues are specific to a condition of being colonized. And that through organization, through having a process and theory that guides us out of that we can start to solve these problems now and make principal struggles that forward the agenda for African people. Because when we stuck in this gender thing, when we stuck trying to figure out how we as women can, accomplish women's rights or get equal to men, that doesn't equalize society. When we're trying to say that we're trying to be equal to men, we're trying to equalize. We're trying to have human beings equal to one another. Like, we're trying to equalize human beings as a part of the revolutionary process so that no one sees themselves as better or domineering or over or the property of another person. And so that's what it means to be a revolutionary, both men and women. And part of the struggle, I think, that's really critical for us to understand too, is that, when we talk about women's liberation and equality, the struggle is not just for women to make the case for our own liberation. It's that everybody in society has to make that struggle. You have to be engaged, actively engaged in practice to destroy those barriers, even in yourself, if you're a man, or even if you're a woman who has taken on, these sort of ideas about gender and maleness and womanness. Destroy that. And sometimes it's hard to destroy that. I'm saying that very, very flippantly, but sometimes it's hard to destroy that because the society in which we live, right, is really geared toward this gender dynamic. And particularly in the African community here in the US, like, even the idea of, like, men being king and women being queen and subservient, and or that men feel like they are accomplishing something, and that women should follow. I see this in some spaces, not all spaces, but some spaces. But the reality is that in real life relationships with one another, like, you're partners. Like, you're solving problems together. In some cases, you might, as the woman, you might be the problem solver and the man might be the executor, right? Or vice versa. And that's partnerships. Like, one person might be better at certain things, than the other person. And so you have to be able to, in that relationship with either your partner or your family or whoever, to figure out who's good at what in order to forward your household, but also how does that transfer into the broader society? What are we good at so that we can make the revolution? But part of also too is recognizing the barriers that prevent a lot of African women from thinking about revolution, thinking about what their struggle is as a part of revolution. Childcare is a part of the revolution, right? Dealing with all these issues specific to women, forced marriages, genital mutilation, labor, um, labor power, wage, all of that is a part of the revolution. And I'm saying wages in turn under the construct of colonialism that determines what your wages are. But like even when we get free, like we have to say that the jobs that are typically hard and male can be given to anybody because technology affords us the opportunity for everybody to do the same damn thing. And the chairman writes that in that same piece that I read from earlier from the Fifth Congress. He talks about technology, which I also appreciate, which says that all of these traditional ideas around gender and maleness and who has more power and physically, is a wash at this point because technology has developed and advanced in a way that can allow African women and men to do the same sorts of things. So that's important too. So like the need for organization, the need for us to develop ourselves and see ourselves as a part of a longer trajectory. Like this is not just one area and one area in time, I guess I'm trying to say, that even with Burkina Faso, Nicaragua, Mozambique, Angola, all these places where there were actually national liberation struggles, the the quality of life for women ain't shit. It ain't good. It ain't good. Because obviously neocolonialism has advanced itself and taken us back to a place, even with all these advances, um, taking us back to a place where these women don't have the agency or the authority to execute their will in that society. So that's why you have like the colony still intact. The status quo is still intact, and so that's the need to address all of these. And that's why there's still a need for the African Revolution and for African women to find themselves inside the African Revolution. I want to say more, but I know that we're running low on time. So I want to give it back to Comrade Coco, and I want to look at some of these questions and start answering them, and then we can continue.
Hooroo. So that was very phenomenal. I got notes. I was over here taking notes for my leadership. So everyone, we're on our way to the Q&A session. Please prepare your questions. Remember, please share your name and location and then your question. Before we hop into the Q&A, we want to go ahead and go over some announcements here. Is it going to allow me to share? I'm frozen. Frozen. There we go. Sorry about that. I froze for some reason. So, we are calling on African women around the world to join the African National Women's Organization, the only anti colonial, anti imperialist revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, in Europe, and the United States. Join the International Collective of Women Building the Revolutionary Capacity of African Women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit anwouhuru.org/join. All right. And support AMWO's Economic Development Project, which funds the programs of AMWO. We is the Colonnades Hair and Body. Now, the Colonnades Hair and Body is a natural personal care products that highlights the natural ingredients and traditional care practices used by indigenous people all over the world. In addition to featuring images and quotes of revolutionaries, support with your purchase today. I use the Colonnades conditioner and it's holy grail for me now. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Support the Uhuru 3 in our fight against the U.S. indictments. Defend the African freedom revolution. Defend the African liberation struggle. Defend the Uhuru movement. Hands off Uhuru.org. So volunteer with us. If you use your skills for the African Revolution, volunteer with us. NWO is looking for moderators, interpreters, chat moderators, and advocates. Email us at info@uhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. Join us again this Sunday at 2 p.m. for our monthly review, news, and analysis program, The Breakdown, when our topic will be Haiti and African news. This is a special because Conrad, our producer Jay, myself, will be joining President Yejide and Alikia on screen with our perspectives and news from the African world. Register on our event site, mem.wildapricot.com/events. You can also register through our website as well. Next Sunday will be our monthly Harriet's Daughter study group and book club. Now, Harriet's Daughter is a way for us to use books to break down more of a political analysis. This year we are this month we are reviewing The Farming of Bones by Edwidge DeConticat, who is a woman author, and it's about the Parsley Massacre in Dominican Republic and Haiti, the border. So those are announcements. I'm going to bring my president Yejide back up so we can go ahead and get into some of these questions. I don't see any questions come through while we were going through the announcements, but I definitely, it was some great comments throughout this.
Yeah, I saw them come up. I actually have another announcement. The Black is Back Coalition is having our national march on the White House on November 4th in Washington, D.C., where we are forwarding we're forwarding the resistance to the attack on the African liberation struggle. And this is the anti-colonial free speech movement, where we are expecting hundreds of African people to come into Washington, D.C. to support the Uhuru 3, but also to support the free speech movement and the right to African people to say whatever we want to say, form whatever relationships that we want to make and foster for our own purposes, and to demand that the indictments be dropped against the Uhuru 3 chairman Omali Shatella and Penny Hess, who is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and Jessie Neville, who is the chairperson of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So we want you all to come to that event. So go to blackisbackcoalition.org to find out how you can register and participate. There's going to be a march on that Saturday, November 4th, and then there's going to also be a conference on the following day on November 5th. And we're calling on unconscious revolutionary, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist comrades to be out there in these streets with us. So go to blackisbackcoalition.org.
I just want to add that there's going to be satellite mobilizations in California,
Los Angeles,
and London, and in South Africa. So, this is a thing that I cannot wait to be out there in the march on November 4th.
World. So I saw a comment that was, I guess at some point during my presentation, someone felt that I was the last African thought that I was talking smack about African men like they weren't enslaved too. I think that's, I don't know how that sounded, but obviously that's not the intention. I recognize that I've said it a couple of times, that the entire African nation was colonized and enslaved, and that the relationships that came out of that were really deepened by the colonial domination itself. Those relationships to African men and African women were really, just really imposed on us by the colonizers. So you have hundreds of years of domination, this idea that men are more valuable than women, and then you have a people who are within that society that are dominated by that society, literally oppressed, banged down by that society, can't do shit else but do the colonizers' bidding. And then so you can see that after the so-called enslavement in the US was over with, that these sort of relationships developed similar to that of the oppressor. And some didn't, but we have to recognize that there is a way that men and women took on these gender roles that was imposed on us through the colonial project and the enslavement of our people. And some of us who still hold on to that idea, and part of that too, in allowing men to also think that they have dominion over us, is a want to support men, because we know that African men in this society are are being beat down. You know what I'm saying? Like, we want to support our brothers, and we don't want you to feel like you don't have a place or that you're not valued. But I think part of that struggle is also recognizing that you can't be the oppressor inside the home. You can't be the oppressor inside the relationship. So that value that African women are placing in our relationships with men have to always place that relationship in women, and not see this as just some queen that you have dominion over, but that an actual partner that can help each other accomplish the goals that we need, particularly in those intimate partner relationships. But it's a part of the national liberation struggle, not to relegate women to some sort of auxiliary role, but actually realize that African women are leaders and African women ourselves have to take on that responsibility too. That's one of the struggles that we've had to really overturn in AMWO for a long period, is like really seeing, ourselves as leaders, not wanting to talk and do speeches, not want to lead on certain things, just want to be cool in the back, and that's a struggle. Like, that's a thing that has to be overturned, that we are overturning. And I'm raising my hand as one of those women who was just like, you want me to be the MC? I couldn't even be the MC. I was just like so petrified by that. And I was good with like organizing stuff in the back, shipping and moving, being on meetings and stuff like that. But to be out front, like, was petrifying. So just really recognizing that our desire to uphold our men, we need that too. And also recognizing that you should not have dominion over women or children, and women should not have dominion over their children either, because nobody is the property of the other.
I unite with that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if there's anything. I don't see any more questions. Mm-hmm. I just see a lot of appreciation. Go ahead.
Sayero asks, what do we need as Africans to maintain agency as a collective? Even African internationalists, we are at times have impeding.
I don't think I understand.
Circumstances we must overcome more often than not.
Yeah.
It is we men. Uhuru Sayero.
Let me see that question one more time.
It's a two-part.
I see it. What do we need as Africans to maintain agency as a collective? Even African internationalists, we at times have impeding circumstances. Yeah, we must overcome more often than not. I think that's like we're talking about, like the subjective relationships that we have to colonialism. Like everybody does. Mm-hmm. that traps us in thinking about those material conditions. And oftentimes we have to struggle with those material conditions while we're also trying to fight for the liberation of ourselves and other people. And part of that, I think, is always making the material conditions that you have to fight through a part of the revolutionary narrative. Like if your bills is high, that's why we gotta destroy colonialism. If you gotta pay $1,000 a month for childcare, that's why we gotta That's why we gotta destroy colonialism. And particularly in those interpersonal relationships, you say that you want to support your, if a woman actually says some shit that's backwards, man, like, that's why we gotta destroy colonialism. You gotta help that sister understand it. Nah, we ain't, like, sis, you can go out and fix the car too.
So it's a comment in here from Lauren who says, Uhuru was scared to put your kids in public school, take them to checkups, take them to the hospital just as many things is exhausted. And that is like, as a parent, that is my reason to be 10 toes deep in the liberation of African people, to remove colonialism, so that I can remove a whole level of fear, because we know that fear manifests itself physically. So we're ill physically due to colonialism, and we are scared for our children. So it's like, let me get to work.
Yeah. And I think when we take ourselves out of this individual thing, like something is just happening to me, and you take it and bring it to the revolutionary struggle to get free, you start to find that you have other people who are experiencing that too. And that's how you build momentum and movement and try to solve these problems. And then you fighting the oppressor, but then you coming together with somebody who has the same problem as you, like, okay, how do we fix this problem? And you start to figure out how do we solve this problem to alleviate this pressure while we're fighting the colonizer. And I just also just want to reiterate, the things that African women raise are not the responsibility of African women ourselves to solve. It's not the responsibility of African women ourselves to solve. We have to raise it. We have to struggle for it. But the call is for the entire society to be engaged in that thing that will alleviate the pressure that is happening to African women. And if there's a pressure that's happening to African men, we have a responsibility to alleviate that pressure off of African men, so that the entire society can move forward to a place where we can actually transform our relationship to the colonizer. I'm not saying that this has to happen in two parts. I think it has to be a part of that process that we're taking. But we cannot, and I say this a lot, and I say this because I also feel this in real life as the president of the African National Women's Organization, to be quite honest, right? Our responsibility is to raise the issues that African women are being impacted by, but that our responsibility is also to encourage you. So when we say volunteer for this, it's not just for African women to volunteer for that. You can volunteer for that. African men can have volunteer. So anybody who's about forwarding the leadership of African women can lend your skills to this thing to alleviate, the pressure that African women have to face. And lending your skill to something and teaching somebody else that skill is really helping toward that, to giving us agency and things like that. So it's not, so thinking about revolution is that, not just saying that you want women and men to share household duties and then you want women to be equal in society, but what practical things are being done in the revolutionary context, right? But also in addition to the interpersonal context. So even as an African women's organization, still calling on the African nation to support the work that we are doing to forward the African agenda. Because when we talk in AMWO, in particular, we talk about the entire African nation.
Correct.
We talk about African women, but we meet, that's a part of we want everybody to be free. And we bring these struggles to the African question, whereas before, it's something else. It's a women's problem. Yeah. And I see that Comrade Norman Richmond appreciated me. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. Comrade Norman Richmond appreciated me for bringing in Claudia Jones. I have to find more pieces from her because, I was like, this is 1949. This was before the women's. I guess I don't know which wave of feminism this would have been in, but there was different waves of women liberation, etc. But I thought that it was important for a couple of reasons to bring in Claudia Jones. She was African woman born in Trinidad, but she did most of her organizing in the US and in UK. And she ended up in the UK because she was deported by the US government for her political work that she was doing in the US around different issues, primarily with the Scottsboro Boys case. She's a journalist, she's a writer. And she's actually, it's funny because the way I was introduced to her too was reading a book called Left of Karl Marx. And because she's buried left of his tomb in England, because she was a staunch communist, right? And but she was also somebody who took the time in 1949 to really research the conditions of African women, to be able to put that down on paper about what we are experiencing, why it is that we are more likely to, why the Communist Party should be organizing us more than anyone else, and why our contribution to the anti-imperialist struggle is integral to us winning. And of course, the Communist Party did whatever they did with that, but she fought that, and eventually Claudia, in England, um, ended up being the founder of one of the biggest cultural parades in the entire country for African people, the Notting Hill Carnival, which was used as a way to empower African people who had been experiencing racial violence, and also who had been silenced, and it gave them a voice culturally, politically, on the ground there. So like, she is a maverick, a trailblazer, and just a staunch anti-imperialist that I can really unite with, and just all of like her work is really eye-opening, and the way she dedicated her life to that. And so I just think we have to find more and more of these women, and I particularly like it too, not gonna lie, because she wasn't necessarily a feminist, which is even though she's of the petty bourgeoisie, but that she was an anti-imperialist, and that grounded her analysis. She's an anti-colonialist. She's that grounded her analysis, and how people should get free. And when we look at all of the different struggles for national liberation and how African women participated in that, I think it's really important for us to always understand like what those material conditions are for African women. And the part of the national strategy, the revolutionary strategy, should always be about not just we're going to get these colonizers or neo-colonialist people out of power, but how in this process are we ensuring that African women are seen, heard, and are leading. So one of the books I didn't refer to was like, oh, African women weren't just like organizing on African women issues, childcare and stuff like that. Because not every African woman has a child or is responsible for children. I really, as a person who has a child, like I'm very conscious of the fact that even though we speak about women with children, that is another element under which colonialism really deepens their stranglehold on African women, is if you have children that you take care of. But even African women who do not have children have a responsibility to the revolution, obviously. And that I really appreciate that that they really highlight these nuances between class. The African petty bourgeoisie women in the city who can wear fancy clothes and wear shoes, and have even created organizations, petty bourgeois organizations, as in namesake only, don't really address the special oppression. And you can even see now in Africa where in some countries Africa still is advanced in the area of equality in many places, right? Like African women have positions in congresses and members of their national councils and senates, and they're able to make decisions. But the condition of African women, that's only like visual. So all the things that people are experiencing like 70 years ago, 40 years ago, still exist. Like this idea of representation, we shouldn't be fooled by that either, where you see the representation of African women in all these positions. So it's not just a struggle to have representation in these decision-making bodies. It's like, what kind of representation are you bringing? Are you a revolutionary that's trying to transform the conditions of African people? Or are you going to be somebody who's just glad that you're there and you get to wear Prada and talk about African women, but never really engaging, never had no history in organizing anything. So yeah, I appreciate like really always like tying it to that. Like women in leadership is not necessarily a forward advancement if the whole society isn't brought forward to alleviate the conditions that African women are experiencing. I didn't see that comment from Arya. From Mecca.
Okay, from Mecca, Comrade Mecca.
Yeah, Organized Fight Win by Sharice Burden Stelly is another book that covers her and the Black women in the Communist Party. Yeah, we got to read that if one of our Coco.
I already put it on the list. Okay. Even though Mecca's on my committee. So
yes.
On Tuesday.
But yeah, I hope this was helpful. And I know that sometimes I ramble a little bit and I might keep harping on a point, But my goal with this study was to open our eyes up to how women participate in national liberation struggles, why they participate in them, why some of them have failed to really address the issues. The revolution itself didn't fail, but like it's the process after the revolution that has failed people. And of course, if African women are engaged in transforming society and pushing forward our issues as a basis for revolutionary struggle, then we lose ourselves in the post-colonial society. But we already know that there is no post-colonial society.
Right.
They thought there was going to be a post-colonial society when you get the Portuguese and the Spaniards and all those people off your back. But as we know, we're still in the colonial mode of production. We still don't have power over we don't have control of the means of production in order to enhance our lives. And foreign powers and entities still have us. We are in their dominion. So until we make that struggle, until we really understand the full scope of what we have to overturn and destroy, then we're going to still be there in 50 years. So whatever Claudia Jones wrote in 1949 might be the same case in 2039. If we don't get it together and we don't understand that. Because I'm telling you, I'm tired of seeing, I see another question. I'm tired of seeing like the Sudan experience every single 5 years. I'm tired of seeing African women being the victims of rape, mass rapes, military rapes in Congo and South Africa and other places, and even in the U.S. is being victims.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, well, how do we change that? Uhuru, do you think Angela Davis had an accurate perspective in her book, Women, Race, and Class? Actually, I haven't read that book. I do, so I can't answer that question. I mean, we do have critique of Angela Davis as a whole, as a petty bourgeois feminist who, not just because she's a feminist, but like a petty bourgeois.
According to her, she's not a feminist. She's a woman internationalist.
Oh, that's what she is. Okay.
That's what she said.
As a woman internationalist, but there's some critique about, just her analysis overall and how limiting it can be in terms of belief forwarding the African. Well, she doesn't talk about African liberation struggle. She talks about Black people. And so maybe we can read that book and I could come back and answer that question. To be quite fair, I don't want to not say analysis. Go ahead.
Been exposed to Lauren yesterday in the MPDM.
Okay.
PE. So, Lauren, I definitely, if you're not already on the annual contact list, yes, come on over here. And,
Yeah, you go to our website
and hang out with us too.
Yeah, dope. Okay. Well, you know what? If there's any other questions before we close out. President Yejide, your ramblings lead to the wonderful scientific response that rounds out to clear and concise truth and response that we need to hear. I salute. Okay.
We'll say, yeah.
I appreciate that, comrade. I appreciate that. Oh yeah. Yes. All right, comrade, thank you so much for listening in to African Women Must Lead and this discussion on African women and colonized women and the national liberation struggle. We do want to encourage more discussion about this, and we'll try to create opportunities where we could have different discussions. We did at one point have a film viewing of Las Sandinistas where we actually viewed it and then had some discussion afterwards. And we're going to continue to find film and other things and ways that we can engage in these discussions. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and we look forward to you joining us on Sunday. All right.
Hooroo. African women
must lead.
Hooroo.